My entitled brother went into debt, and now my parents expect me to bail him out, but I have other plans. Hey Reddit, I've been lurking here for a while, but today I feel like I need to share my story. It's a long one, so buckle up. I'm in my late 30s, and I've worked hard to build a successful career and a comfortable life for myself. But no amount of success can prepare you for dealing with entitled family members, especially when they expect you to clean up their messes. This story revolves around my younger brother, Jack. He's always been the golden child, the one my parents doted on and spoiled. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one, the one who had to pave my own way. Over the years, I've tried to be a good sister, but Jack's entitlement has only grown, and now it's spiraled into something that's threatening to tear our family apart. Growing up, it was clear that Jack was the favorite. He was charming, outgoing, and knew exactly how to wrap our parents around his finger. While I was studying hard and helping out around the house, Jack was getting away with murder. If he got in trouble at school, it was shrugged off as boys will be boys. If he wanted something, no matter how expensive, our parents would bend over backward to get it for him. I, on the other hand, was expected to be the responsible one. I got good grades, worked part-time jobs from a young age, and saved every penny I earned. My parents weren't neglectful, but they had a way of expecting more from me simply because I was the older child and more mature. It didn't help that Jack had a talent for playing the victim. Whenever he messed up, he'd find a way to blame someone else, or worse, make it seem like he was the one who had been wronged. And our parents? They buy into it every time. He's just sensitive, they'd say. You know how hard things are for him. It was infuriating, but I learned to deal with it. I focused on my studies, got into a good college on a scholarship, and eventually landed a well-paying job in finance. I was determined to make something of myself, and I did. But even as I climbed the ladder of success, Jack's entitlement only grew. Jack never had much interest in working hard or building a career. He coasted through college, barely passing his classes, and then bounced from one job to another, never sticking with anything for long. Our parents continued to support him financially, even well into his 20s. They paid his rent, bought him a car, and covered his credit card bills when he overspent, which was often. Every time he got into financial trouble, our parents would bail him out. They'd make excuses for him, saying he just needed to find his passion or that the job market was tough. Meanwhile, I was working my ass off to pay off my student loans and save for a future. Eventually, Jack got involved in some get-rich-quick schemes. He started hanging out with a new group of friends who were all about flashy cars, expensive clothes, and living beyond their means. They convinced him to invest in dubious business ventures and cryptocurrency, promising him quick returns. Jack, being the impulsive and reckless person he is, jumped in with both feet. It wasn't long before things started to go south. The business ventures flopped, the cryptocurrency market crashed, and Jack found himself deep in debt. But instead of facing the consequences of his actions, he did what he always does, turn to our parents for help. I'll never forget the day my parents called me, their voices tinged with desperation. Jack had racked up a staggering amount of debt, and they were at their wits' end. He was on the verge of losing his apartment, his car had been repossessed, and creditors were hounding him day and night. My parents had already emptied their savings to bail him out once, but this time the debt was too much for them to handle. "We don't know what to do," my mom said, her voice breaking. "He's our son, and we can't just let him drown." I knew where this conversation was headed. They wanted me to step in and save the day, just like I always had. But this time, I wasn't so sure. I had worked hard for everything I had, and the idea of bailing out my irresponsible brother didn't sit well with me. But I also didn't want to see my parents suffer. "Mom, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I understand that you're worried about Jack, but this is a pattern. Every time he gets into trouble, you bail him out, and he never learns. Maybe it's time for him to face the consequences." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then my dad spoke up, his voice tight with frustration. "We've tried that, but it's different this time. The debt is so overwhelming that he could end up homeless or worse. We don't know what else to do." They continued to plead with me, telling me how much they needed my help, how much Jack needed my help. I could hear the guilt in their voices, the fear that they had failed as parents. And a part of me felt sorry for them, sorry that they had been so blind to Jack's manipulations, sorry that they were now paying the price for their enabling. But I couldn't just let it go. I knew that if I bailed Jack out this time, it would only reinforce the cycle. He'd never learned to take responsibility for his actions, and my parents would continue to be his safety net. I wasn't willing to let that happen. I took a deep breath and made a decision that I knew would change the dynamics of my family forever. "Mom, Dad, I love you both, and I care about Jack. But I can't keep cleaning up his messes. I've worked hard for what I have, and I'm not going to throw it away because Jack refuses to grow up. I'll help him find a financial advisor, and I'll pay for a few sessions if it helps, but I'm not paying off his debt." My mom started to cry, and my dad's voice grew cold. "So that's it," he asked. "You're just going to let your brother suffer?" "I'm not letting him suffer," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm giving him a chance to take responsibility for his life. It's not going to be easy, but it's something he has to do, and you need to stop enabling him." The conversation ended on a sour note, with my parents disappointed and angry. I knew I had hurt them, but I also knew that I had made the right decision. For the first time in my life, I was standing up for myself, setting boundaries, and refusing to let my family's dysfunction dictate my actions. But I also knew that this was far from over. My parents weren't the type to take no for an answer, and I was bracing myself for what was to come. As expected, My decision to refuse the bailout didn't go over well with the rest of the family. Word got out quickly. My mom, unable to keep it to herself, had confided in a few relatives, and soon everyone knew about the situation. I started getting calls and messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins, all urging me to reconsider. "You're successful now," one of my aunts said. "You can afford to help him. He's your brother, after all." "You don't understand how hard things have been for him," another relative insisted. "He's just had a run of bad luck. Don't you want to see him get back on his feet?" It was exhausting. Everyone seemed to think that because I had money, I had an obligation to use it to bail out my brother. No one seemed to consider the years of reckless behavior that had led to this point, the countless times Jack had been bailed out before, or the toll it had taken on our parents. But I held my ground. I repeated my offer to help Jack find a financial advisor, to pay for therapy if he needed it, but I made it clear that I wasn't paying off his debt. Some of my relatives understood, but others were furious. They accused me of being selfish, of abandoning my family when they needed me most. The tension in the family reached a boiling point, and I found myself increasingly isolated. My parents were barely speaking to me, and when they did, it was with a mix of anger and disappointment. Jack, predictably, was livid. He called me, shouting about how I was turning my back on him, how I was letting him drown. "You're rich," he yelled. "What's a few $1,000s to you? You're just doing this to punish me." "I'm not punishing you, Jack," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm trying to help you. Bailing you out won't solve anything. You need to take responsibility for your actions and figure out a way to get out of this mess on your own." He didn't take it well. He hung up on me, and for weeks afterward, I didn't hear from him or my parents. It was a difficult time, lonely and filled with self-doubt. But I kept reminding myself that I was doing the right thing, that I was breaking a cycle that had gone on for far too long. While I was dealing with the fallout from my decision, Jack was hitting rock bottom. Without anyone to bail him out, he was forced to face the full consequences of his actions. His friends, the ones who had encouraged him to take on risky investments, were nowhere to be found. He lost his apartment, had to sell off whatever assets he had left, and moved back in with our parents. It wasn't long before our parents started calling me again, their voices filled with desperation. Jack was depressed, they said. He wasn't eating, wasn't leaving the house, wasn't even trying to find a job. They were worried about him, and they didn't know what to do. "Please," my mom begged. "He needs help. We all need help. Can't you just loan him the money? Just this once?" My resolve was tested, but I knew I had to stay strong. I reiterated my offer to pay for therapy, to help him find a financial advisor, but I made it clear that I wasn't going to loan him money. I could hear the frustration and helplessness in their voices, but I knew that giving in now would undo everything I was trying to achieve. Eventually, my parents relented. They convinced Jack to see a therapist, and with some professional help, he started to slowly pull himself out of his depression. It was a long and painful process, but it was something he had to go through. And as much as it hurt to see my family in pain, I knew that this was the only way things could change. Months passed, and gradually, things started to improve. Jack found a job, not a high-paying one, but enough to start paying down his debt. He moved out of our parents' house and into a small apartment. It wasn't the life of luxury he had once imagined for himself, but it was a start. And most importantly, he was learning to live within his means. My parents, too, started to come around. It took time, but they began to see that my refusal to bail out Jack wasn't an act of cruelty, but one of tough love. They still had moments of doubt, but as they watched Jack slowly rebuild his life, they started to understand why I had made the decision I did. As for me, I found peace in knowing that I had done what was necessary, even if it had strained my relationships. I had drawn a line, set boundaries, and refused to let my family's dysfunction dictate my life. It wasn't easy, but it was the only way to break the cycle. Just when I thought things were finally settling down, life threw an unexpected twist my way. Jack, who had spent so many years blaming others for his problems, reached out to me with a message that took me completely by surprise. He apologized. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a simple message asking if we could meet up and talk. I was hesitant at first, unsure of what to expect, but I agreed. We met at a small cafe, and for the first time in years, Jack seemed different. He wasn't the arrogant, entitled person I had known. He was humbled, and there was a sincerity in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. "I know I messed up," he said, his voice low. "I know I've been a burden to you and Mom and Dad. I'm sorry for all the crap I put you through." I was speechless. I never expected an apology from Jack, much less one that felt so genuine. "I'm not asking for anything," he continued. "I just wanted you to know that I get it now. I was stupid, and I took advantage of you and our parents. I know I've got a lot to make up for, but I'm trying to change." We talked for hours that day, and for the first time, I felt like I was talking to the brother I had always wanted, a brother who was finally taking responsibility for his life. It wasn't an easy conversation, and there was still a lot of hurt to work through, but it was a start. After that day, things started to change between us. Jack and I slowly began to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of tension, but it was a step in the right direction. He continued to work hard, paying off his debt, and building a life for himself that was based on responsibility, not entitlement. My parents, too, started to heal. They had been through a lot, and it took time for them to adjust to the new dynamics in our family. But as they saw Jack taking control of his life, they began to let go of the guilt and the need to protect him from the consequences of his actions. And as for me, I found a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. I had spent so many years resenting Jack and feeling burdened by my family's expectations, but now I was finally free of that weight. I had stood up for myself, set boundaries, and refused to let my family's dysfunction control my life. It wasn't an easy journey, but it was worth it. And in the end, it brought us all to a better place. Thanks for reading, and I hope my story can help others who are going through something similar. Subscribe and like for more videos.